When Silent Wolf's eyes met Eleanor's across the dusty street, 8 years of secrets crumbled in a single electric heartbeat. In that forbidden moment of recognition, both knew their connection would either bridge their warring worlds or destroy everything they'd fought to protect. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Silver Creek, Montana, summer of 1875. The sun descended slowly over the mountains surrounding Silver Creek, painting the sky in shades of red and orange. Dust danced in the air like tiny golden stars suspended in the evening light. The silence of the main street was interrupted by the rhythmic sound of horse hooves against the packed earth. The inhabitants of the small frontier town stopped what they were doing, watching with suspicion the figure approaching. Silent Wolf kept his back straight on his spotted horse. The strong features of his copper face remained impassive, but his dark eyes, alert like those of the animal that gave him his name, observed every movement around him. Women pulled their children close. Men placed their hands on the belts where they kept their weapons. The tension was palpable. An Apache in town meant trouble. That's what everyone thought. "Look who decided to visit us," grunted old McCoy from his chair in front of the barber shop. "I thought we'd made it clear for the savages to stay away from here." Silent Wolf ignored the words. He had learned enough of the white man's language to understand the insults, but had also learned that responding to them would only bring more trouble. His people needed provisions after the harsh winter. The rivers had frozen longer than normal, and game had become scarce. He brought pelts to trade for flour, coffee, and medicine. He tied his horse in front of the supply store and dismounted with an agile movement. The years in the mountains had made him strong, his muscles visible beneath the brown skin, marked by small scars, silent witnesses to his warrior life. He carried a bag of pelts over his shoulder and at his waist a knife instead of a firearm. He knew the shopkeeper's revolver would be ready under the counter. That's when the school door opened across the street. Eleanor Thornwood appeared on the threshold, with books in her arms and her reddish-brown hair partially loose from the bun that tried to contain it. She wore a simple dark blue dress, sober as befitted a teacher, but which couldn't hide the gracefulness of her movements. Her green eyes, rarely intimidated, met Silent Wolf's across the dusty street. Instead of looking away or showing fear, she observed him with a curiosity that caught him off guard. "Miss Eleanor, come inside right now." Her father's voice, the school principal, sounded alarmed. "There's a savage in town." She didn't move immediately. For a moment, too brief to be noticed by anyone else, her lips curved into a small smile. Not of derision, as Silent Wolf was accustomed to seeing, but of recognition. The warrior felt something strange in his chest, as if his heart had skipped a beat. That woman. There was something familiar about her, even though he had never seen her before. "The medicines arrived as promised," said the shopkeeper in a low voice when Silent Wolf finally entered the store. "Almost no one knows I do business with your people. I prefer to keep it that way." Silent Wolf nodded, placing the pelts on the counter. "My nephew lives thanks to the medicine that arrived last winter." "It wasn't me who sent it," the man replied, counting the pelts. "They were left here for you. They never told me who." While they negotiated, Silent Wolf saw through the foggy window the silhouette of the teacher crossing the street. She carried something in a leather bag. With determined steps, she disappeared in the direction of the post office. Something about her intrigued him, like a distant melody he couldn't fully recall. That night, returning to his people in the mountains, Silent Wolf carried more than provisions. He carried the image of a pair of green eyes that for the first time in a long time had looked at him not as a threat, but as a man. Eleanor Thornwood sat at her desk long after the children had gone home, the afternoon light casting long shadows across the empty classroom. The wooden floors still bore traces of chalk dust and the scent of pine from the morning's cleaning. She closed her journal with a gentle movement, concealing the careful notes she'd made about medicinal herbs and their properties. For 2 years now, she had studied in secret, learning from books she ordered from back east, from whispered conversations with the old Mexican woman who sold herbs at the edge of town, and from cautious observations of the native healers she glimpsed from afar. Her father would be horrified if he knew. Principal James Thornwood was a good man, but firmly believed in the separation between the civilized townspeople and the savage tribes that surrounded Silver Creek. "Eleanor, are you still here?" Her father's voice echoed from the hallway. She quickly tucked her journal into her desk drawer. "Just finishing some grading, Father." He appeared in the doorway, his tall frame casting a longer shadow still. At 52, James Thornwood still stood straight as a pine, though his once brown hair had faded to gray. "You should have been home hours ago. It's not safe to be out alone, especially with that Apache in town today." "I believe he was just trading, Father. He didn't seem dangerous." "Didn't seem dangerous?" His eyebrows shot up. "That's precisely when they are most dangerous. Promise me you'll stay away from any Indians you see in town." Eleanor nodded, not trusting herself to speak. How could she explain that she'd been leaving bundles of medicine and food at the trading post for months now, that the mysterious illness that had swept through the Apache camp last winter had haunted her nights until she found a way to help? "I'll walk you home," her father said, his tone softening. "Mrs. Parker mentioned she saw you at the post office. Were you mailing letters again to that medical school in Boston?" "Just inquiring about their library," she said, gathering her things. It wasn't entirely a lie. She had been corresponding with a professor there who sent her information about treatments for diseases. Information she had put to use. As they walked down Silver Creek's main street, Eleanor couldn't help but glance toward the hills where the Apache camp was rumored to be. She had never gone there herself. Such an action would be unthinkable for a white woman, let alone the schoolteacher. But she had heard stories from traders about a deadly fever that had claimed many lives over the winter. Had her medicines helped? Had they reached the right people? For months, she had left packages with the storekeeper, Mr. Jenkins, with specific instructions, never knowing if they actually made it to those who needed them. "The town council is meeting tonight," her father said as they reached their small house at the edge of town. "There's talk of requesting more soldiers from Fort Benton to deal with the Indian problem." Eleanor's heart sank. "What problem? There hasn't been any trouble in months." "Prevention, my dear. Better to show strength than invite attack." He patted her shoulder. "Now, your mother will be waiting with supper." Inside, the modest home was warm with the smell of fresh bread. Martha Thornwood, once a beauty from Virginia who had followed her husband west with romantic notions of frontier life, now moved more slowly than she once had, but her smile remained unchanged. "I saw that Indian brave in town today," she said as they sat down to eat. "Tall fellow, had the strangest feeling I'd seen him somewhere before." Eleanor kept her eyes on her plate. "Perhaps during one of the trading days." "No, something else," her mother's voice trailed off. "Reminded me of that young man who helped us when our wagon broke down on our journey here, remember James? The one who disappeared before we could thank him properly." Her father grunted dismissively. "That was years ago, Martha, and miles from here." Eleanor said nothing, but a strange suspicion began to form in her mind. Could it be the same man? The one her mother had described from their journey west when Eleanor was just 16? The man who had saved their lives and then vanished like mist before dawn. The moon cast silver light over the Apache camp nestled in the foothills. Silent Wolf sat before the small fire outside his dwelling, his weathered hands working methodically to craft new arrowheads. The mountains loomed dark and protective around them, ancient guardians that had sheltered his people for generations. "You have been quiet since your return," said Singing Bird, his younger sister, as she settled beside him. Her infant son slept peacefully in the cradleboard at her feet. "Did something happen in the white man's town?" Silent Wolf's hands paused their work. "The town is the same. Fearful eyes, hands ready to reach for weapons." "Then what troubles you, brother?" Singing Bird studied his face in the firelight. He hesitated, then reached for a small bundle he had set aside. "The medicines that saved Little Hawk came again. I asked the trader who sends them." He unwrapped a small glass bottle with a neatly written label. "He claims not to know." Singing Bird took the bottle, examining it with reverence. During the long winter, her son had fallen ill with the fever that swept through their camp. Many had died, including her husband, but Little Hawk had survived after Silent Wolf brought back mysterious medicines from Silver Creek. "It must be someone who knows the healing ways," she said. "Perhaps that doctor they speak of in the next settlement." Silent Wolf shook his head. "The trader says no doctor has visited for months." His thoughts returned to the red-haired teacher, the way her eyes had met his without fear. "There was a woman in town today. She looked at me as if she knew me." "A white woman?" Singing Bird's eyebrows rose in surprise. "The school teacher." He found himself unable to explain the strange feeling of recognition, the momentary connection across the dusty street. "Be careful, brother," she warned softly. "White women are forbidden to our men. Their people would kill you for even looking at her too long." Silent Wolf knew she was right. Relationships between Apache men and white women were not merely discouraged. They were dangerous, often deadly for the Apache. Yet he could not forget those green eyes, bright with intelligence and something else he couldn't name. "There is something else," he said after a long silence. "Something familiar about her." Singing Bird watched her brother curiously. Silent Wolf had always been the quiet one, the observer. Since boyhood, he had said little but noticed everything. For him to speak of a white woman this way was unprecedented. "Do you remember the story Grandfather told," he continued, "of the wagon that broke down near Red Rock Canyon? The family from the east that would have died if he had not helped them. The one with the woman who treated his wound. That was many seasons ago." Silent Wolf nodded slowly. 8 summers. I was with him that day." Singing Bird's eyes widened. "You never told me this. I was young, just beginning my warrior training. Grandfather was teaching me to track elk when we heard the crying." His eyes grew distant with the memory. A wagon axle had broken. The father was injured, bleeding. The mother tried to help him while a young girl kept 2 small children from wandering away. "You think this teacher is that girl?" Singing Bird asked incredulously. "I do not know. I was hidden, watching, while Grandfather approached them. He fixed their wagon, showed the woman how to treat her husband's wound with herbs. They offered him money, but he refused. We left before they could ask our names." The fire crackled between them, sending sparks into the night sky. In the distance, an owl called. "If it is her," Singing Bird said carefully, "what does it matter now?" Silent Wolf had no answer. Yet something had stirred in him today, a memory, a connection to a time when relations between their people and the whites had not always ended in bloodshed. "The tribal council meets tomorrow," he said, changing the subject. "They say more soldiers are coming to the fort. Black Fox wants to move our camp deeper into the mountains." "And what do you want?" Silent Wolf looked toward Silver Creek, invisible beyond the hills but present in his mind. "I want our people to survive. I want Little Hawk to grow strong without fear." He paused. "And I want to know who sends the medicine that keeps us alive." As Singing Bird departed with her sleeping son, Silent Wolf remained by the fire. The face of the teacher returned to his thoughts. There had been kindness in her eyes, not the contempt he usually saw from white women. If she was indeed the girl from years ago, perhaps she remembered too. Morning would bring the council, and with it, decisions that would affect all their lives. But tonight, under the vast Montana sky, Silent Wolf allowed himself to wonder about Eleanor Thornwood, the woman who had looked at him not as an enemy, but as a man she somehow knew. The schoolhouse bell rang clear across Silver Creek, calling children to their lessons. Eleanor arranged her desk with methodical precision, inkwells filled, primers stacked neatly, her worn leather-bound medical journal hidden beneath her teaching materials. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. "Miss Thornwood?" A small voice interrupted her thoughts. Little Sarah Miller stood in the doorway, clutching a bunch of wildflowers. "My ma says to thank you for the medicine for my brother's cough. He's much better now." Eleanor smiled, accepting the humble bouquet. "I'm glad to hear it. Remember, the tea must be taken 3 times daily until the cough is completely gone." The other children began filing in, their chatter filling the room. Eleanor had been teaching in Silver Creek for 3 years now, ever since completing her education back east. What had begun as reluctant duty, helping her father run the school in this frontier town, had become her calling. Not just teaching letters and numbers, but quietly using her knowledge to help where the town's occasional visiting doctor could not. "Children, please open your readers to page 42. She instructed, pushing thoughts of medicine and of dark, watchful eyes from her mind. The morning passed quickly. As noon approached, Eleanor dismissed the younger children, keeping the older ones for additional arithmetic. Through the window, she noticed increased activity in the street, riders coming into town, the sheriff deep in conversation with several men outside his office. "Miss Thornwood," called Thomas, the blacksmith's son, "what's happening out there?" "Eyes on your work, Thomas," she replied, though she too wondered. When the final bell rang, Eleanor gathered her things quickly. Instead of heading home, she made her way to Jenkins' store, where townsfolk often gathered to exchange news. "Afternoon, Miss Thornwood." Jenkins greeted her, his eyes darting nervously to the packages stacked behind his counter, including the bundle of medicine she had left for him to pass along. "Come for your order of writing paper?" "Yes, please." She lowered her voice, "and to check if my other package will be delivered as discussed." Jenkins nodded almost imperceptibly. "Got a man heading that way tomorrow." He wrapped her paper in brown cloth, then added, "You might want to head home directly, miss. There's trouble brewing." "What kind of trouble?" The storekeeper hesitated. "Army Scout came in this morning. Says there's been cattle missing from the Henderson place. Council's meeting tonight, talking about sending a party to the Indian camp." Eleanor's stomach tightened. Surely they wouldn't blame the Apache without evidence. Jenkins gave her a look that suggested her naivety. "Evidence ain't always required in these parts, miss. Not when it comes to Indians." Outside the store, Eleanor nearly collided with Sheriff Burke, a stocky man with a perpetually furrowed brow. "Miss Thornwood, you should be heading home," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Streets ain't safe today." "I was just leaving," she replied. "Mr. Jenkins mentioned trouble with the Henderson cattle?" The sheriff's expression darkened. 3 head missing. Found tracks leading toward the foothills. "That doesn't necessarily mean—" "Your father's at the town hall now, miss. I suggest you join him there or go straight home." His tone made it clear the conversation was over. Eleanor reluctantly turned toward home, her mind racing. If a posse went to the Apache camp looking for trouble, they would surely find it, whether it existed or not. And if the mysterious warrior she'd seen was there, the memory of their brief exchange of glances returned to her. There had been something in his eyes, intelligence, dignity, and yes, recognition. The same man who had watched silently 8 years ago while his elder had saved her family. She couldn't be certain. Back at home, Eleanor slipped into her room and retrieved her journal from beneath her shawl. She quickly penned a warning note, explaining about the missing cattle and the town's suspicions. Without allowing herself to reconsider, she sealed it in an envelope. But how to deliver it? She couldn't risk being seen heading toward the Apache camp. As she pondered this, hoofbeats sounded outside. Looking through her window, Eleanor's breath caught. At the edge of town, barely visible in the gathering dusk, sat a lone rider on a spotted horse. Silent Wolf had returned to Silver Creek. Silent Wolf had not planned to return to Silver Creek so soon. The tribal council had been divided, Black Fox and the elder warriors advocating retreat into the mountains, while the younger men argued for standing their ground. In the end, they had reached a compromise: maintain the camp, but send scouts to watch the town, to see if the rumors of soldiers were true. He had volunteered immediately, though he told himself it was duty, not the memory of green eyes, that drove him. Now, as dusk fell over the town, he kept to the shadows. The streets were unusually busy for evening. Men gathered in small groups, their voices carrying on the wind, angry, determined. Something had changed since yesterday. Silent Wolf dismounted at the edge of town, tethering his horse in a small grove of cottonwoods. Moving silently, he made his way closer, staying in the darkness between buildings. Outside the sheriff's office, he caught fragments of conversation. Tracks definitely Apache. Henderson wants blood. Ride out at first light. Cattle theft. The realization came with bitter understanding. It was an old story. Whenever livestock went missing, blame fell on the nearest tribe. Silent Wolf knew his people had taken no cattle. Their hunters had been in the northern hills for days, returning with elk and deer enough to feed the camp, but truth rarely mattered in these conflicts. He was about to retreat when movement from a nearby house caught his attention. A slender figure in a dark cloak slipped out a side door, glancing nervously around before hurrying toward the general store. Even in the dim light, he recognized her immediately. Eleanor Thornwood moved with purpose, an envelope clutched tightly in her hand. She appeared to be alone, though Silent Wolf noticed how she kept to the edges of the street, away from the lamplight. Clearly, she did not wish to be seen. Curiosity and something deeper made him follow, keeping his distance. She stopped at the rear entrance of Jenkins' store, knocking softly in a pattern that suggested a prearranged signal. The door opened briefly, and she passed something, the envelope, to someone inside before quickly turning away. As she hurried back toward her home, Silent Wolf made a decision that went against all caution. He stepped into her path. Eleanor gasped, one hand flying to her throat, but she did not scream. Recognition dawned in her eyes almost immediately. "You," she whispered, "you shouldn't be here. They're planning to come to your camp tomorrow, about the cattle." Her direct words surprised him. "I know. I heard. Your people didn't take them, did they?" The question held no accusation, only certainty. "No." He studied her face, noting how the moonlight traced the delicate lines of her cheekbones, the slight furrow between her brows. "Why do you help us?" The directness of his question seemed to startle her. "I don't know what you mean." "The medicine for the fever. It was you." Eleanor's lips parted slightly, but she didn't deny it. "How did you know?" "I didn't, not until now." A small victory, this confession. Why risk helping us? She glanced back toward the street, where voices were growing louder. "Not here. It isn't safe for you." Her hand reached out, almost touching his arm before she caught herself. "Behind the schoolhouse, there's a storage shed. Wait there." Before he could respond, she was gone, slipping back into the shadows toward her home. Silent Wolf stood motionless, aware that he had just crossed a boundary. Speaking with a white woman alone at night, if he were discovered, the consequences would be severe. Yet he found himself moving toward the schoolhouse, drawn by the promise of answers, and by Eleanor herself. The shed was little more than a rough wooden structure with a sloped roof, hidden from the main street by the schoolhouse. Inside, he found it surprisingly neat, with shelves of supplies and a small table. Moonlight filtered through a single high window, casting patterns on the earthen floor. Silent Wolf settled into the darkness to wait, his senses alert to every sound from the town. If she came, what then? And if this was a trap? But somehow he knew it wasn't. Those green eyes held no deceit, only a courage that matched his own. Outside, Silver Creek continued its uneasy evening, unaware of the connection forming in its midst, a connection that defied every boundary their divided worlds had established. Eleanor's hands trembled as she gathered supplies in her bedroom, a small lantern, bandages, and several bottles from her hidden medicine chest. She had told her parents she was retiring early with a headache, but sleep was far from her mind. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared it might wake the entire house. What madness had possessed her to arrange this meeting? She, a schoolteacher, the principal's daughter, meeting secretly with an Apache warrior, while the town plotted against his people. If discovered, she would be ruined, possibly worse. And yet, she had to warn him properly to explain. She owed him that much. Waiting until her parents' bedroom light extinguished, Eleanor slipped out through the kitchen door. The night had grown cooler, the sky a canopy of brilliant stars above Silver Creek. From the saloon came bursts of laughter and angry voices, the posse planning tomorrow's confrontation. She kept to the gardens and back alleys, her dark cloak rendering her nearly invisible. The schoolhouse loomed silent and imposing in the moonlight. Eleanor hesitated at the corner, scanning for any sign of movement before darting to the shed. Her fingers fumbled with the latch, her breath coming in short gasps. "You came." His voice, low and melodic, startled her despite her expectations. Silent Wolf stood in the corner, tall and still as the shadows themselves. In the confined space of the shed, his presence seemed to fill every inch of air. Eleanor quickly closed the door behind her and set her lantern on the table, adjusting the flame to a gentle glow. "I wasn't sure you would," she replied, setting down her bundle. "It's dangerous for you to be in town tonight. Dangerous for both of us." His English was better than she'd expected, accented but clear. Eleanor nodded, suddenly uncertain where to begin, the questions that had burned within her all day now stuck in her throat. Instead, she opened her medical bag. "I've brought more medicine. Fever season will return with the autumn rains." Silent Wolf stepped forward into the pool of lantern light. His face, freed from the shadows, was striking. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes that reflected the small flame like obsidian. A thin scar ran along his left temple, disappearing into his hair. "You are the one who saved Little Hawk," he said. "My sister's son would have died without your medicine." "I'm glad I could help," Eleanor replied softly. "I heard about the fever from traders. I studied." She stopped, realizing how strange it would sound. Her secret education in medicine, her clandestine efforts to help people she'd never met. But he didn't seem to find it odd. Instead, he studied her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You were there," he said finally. "8 summers ago, the broken wagon." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. "Red Rock Canyon," she whispered. "You were there with the elder who helped us? My father's leg was crushed when the wagon overturned. We would have died if—" "My grandfather," Silent Wolf confirmed. "He taught me the old ways, how to track, how to heal." "I remember watching from behind the wagon," Eleanor said, the memory suddenly vivid. "There was a young man, you, in the trees. I saw you, but when I told my father later, he said I was imagining things." A ghost of a smile touched Silent Wolf's lips. I was not supposed to be seen. "You've grown up," she said, then blushed at the obviousness of her statement. "As have you, Eleanor Thornwood." The sound of her name in his voice sent an inexplicable warmth through her chest. "How do you know my name?" "People speak it when you pass. The teacher who brings medicine to the sick." He paused. "Why do you help us? Your people fear mine." Eleanor considered her answer carefully. "Because sickness doesn't care what color your skin is or what language you speak. Because I have knowledge that can help, and to withhold it would be wrong." She met his gaze directly. "And because I remember how your grandfather helped us without asking anything in return." Silent Wolf nodded slowly, as if her answer satisfied something within him. "Tomorrow," Eleanor continued, urgency returning to her voice, "men from town plan to ride to your camp about the missing cattle." "We took no cattle," he interjected firmly. "I believe you." And she did, with a certainty that surprised even herself. "But they won't listen. You need to warn your people. That is why I came to town, to learn their plans." He moved toward the door, then hesitated. "The medicine you send, I will make sure it reaches those who need it." "Wait," Eleanor said, reaching into her pocket. She withdrew a small leather-bound book. "Take this. It explains how to use the medicines, with drawings of each plant. I've been working on it for months." Silent Wolf accepted the book, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange. The brief contact sent a jolt through Eleanor's arm. "Be careful," she whispered. For a moment, neither moved. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of the impossible bridge they had begun to build. Then a sound from outside, voices approaching the schoolhouse, broke the spell. "Hide," Eleanor whispered, extinguishing the lantern with a quick breath. Darkness enveloped them as the voices grew closer. Men, their words slurred with whiskey and anger. "Check behind the school too. That savage could be anywhere." Silent Wolf moved with fluid grace toward the window, but Eleanor caught his arm. "No, they'll see you." Instead, she pointed to a narrow space behind the tall supply shelves. Without hesitation, he slipped into the cramped hiding place just as boots scuffed the ground outside. The door rattled. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. "It's locked," came a gruff voice. "Break it open," another suggested. "Hold on now," a third voice interrupted, Sheriff Burke. "This here's school property. Principal Thornwood won't take kindly to us breaking down doors without cause. We got cause, an Indian in town, and we'll find him, but not by destroying the schoolhouse. Come on, let's check the livery stable." The footsteps receded, but Eleanor didn't move, hardly daring to breathe until the voices faded completely. Only then did she sink onto a small stool, her legs suddenly weak. Silent Wolf emerged from his hiding place, his expression grave. "I must go now." "Yes," she agreed, still shaken. "They're searching the entire town." He moved to the door, listening intently before turning back to her. His eyes held hers in the darkness. "Thank you," he said simply. "Will I see you again?" The question escaped before Eleanor could stop it, a pause, heavy with possibilities. "It would be safer if you did not." "I didn't ask what was safer." The corner of his mouth curved slightly upward, not quite a smile, but something close. "Then yes, Eleanor Thornwood, you will see me again." With that, he slipped into the night, silent as his namesake. Eleanor waited several minutes before making her own escape, clutching her medical bag close. As she hurried home through the back alleys, she realized she was smiling despite the danger, despite everything that separated them. Dawn broke over Silver Creek with the clatter of horses and men assembling before the sheriff's office. Eleanor watched from her bedroom window as 20 riders, including her father, prepared to ride out to the Apache camp. Her warning had been delivered, but would it be enough? She dressed quickly in her plainest work dress, pinning her hair severely at the nape of her neck. Her mother looked up in surprise when she entered the kitchen. "Eleanor, I didn't expect you up so early after your headache last night." "I'm feeling much better," she replied, pouring herself coffee. "Is father already gone?" Martha Thornwood nodded, worry lining her face. "They're riding out to those Indians. I begged him not to go, but he says it's his duty as a town leader." Eleanor bit back her objections, knowing they would only raise suspicion. Instead, she said, "I'm sure they'll be careful." "That Apache they saw in town yesterday," her mother began, then hesitated. There was something familiar about him. "I keep thinking of that young man from Red Rock Canyon." Eleanor nearly dropped her cup. "Why do you say that?" "Something in the way he moved, the way he held himself." Martha sighed. "I'm probably imagining things. It was so long ago." "What if it was him?" Eleanor asked carefully. Her mother looked troubled. "Then I hope your father doesn't remember too. He's never forgiven them, you know, not since your brother." The mention of Michael hung in the air between them. Eleanor's older brother, killed in a skirmish with an Apache band when she was just 14. It was why they had moved west, her father accepting the teaching position to start fresh, away from painful memories. But he had brought his hatred with him, a smoldering ember that had never died. "I should get to school," Eleanor said softly, kissing her mother's cheek. The schoolhouse was empty, the children kept home due to the town's tension. Eleanor unlocked the door and walked immediately to the storage shed, checking for any sign of last night's meeting. Finding none, she returned to her classroom and sat at her desk, unable to concentrate on lesson plans. Her thoughts kept returning to Silent Wolf, the recognition in his eyes, the quiet strength in his voice. How different he was from the savage her father described. Had he made it safely back to warn his people? Were they even now preparing to defend themselves against an unjust accusation? The sound of a rider approaching at speed jolted her from her thoughts. A young boy from the Henderson Ranch practically fell from his horse outside the school. "Miss Thornwood," he called, breathless, "we found the cattle. They wasn't stolen at all. They broke through the fence and got themselves stuck in that dry creek bed past our south pasture." Eleanor was on her feet immediately. "Have you told the sheriff?" "He already left with the others," the boy panted. "Pa sent riders after them, but they got a big head start." "I need your horse," she said, decision made in an instant. The boy looked confused. "Miss, I can catch them if I cut across Miller's Ridge," she explained, already moving toward the door. "It's important, Tommy. Lives depend on it." Something in her voice must have convinced him, for he nodded and offered his reins without further question. Eleanor gathered her skirts and mounted, turning the horse toward the foothills. She had never ridden alone this far from town, but she knew the way. Miller's Ridge would let her intercept the posse before they reached the Apache camp, before they could spark a conflict based on a mistake. As she urged the horse into a gallop, Eleanor tried not to think about what would happen if she failed, or what her father would say when he discovered his daughter racing to protect the very people he blamed for his son's death. The morning sun beat down mercilessly as Eleanor urged the horse across Miller's Ridge. Her hands gripped the reins until her knuckles whitened, her body moving in rhythm with the animal's powerful stride. She had never ridden so recklessly before, but desperation drove her forward. Her hair had come loose, streaming behind her like a copper pennant. The proper schoolteacher was gone, replaced by a woman who understood exactly what was at stake. If the posse reached the Apache camp with accusations of theft, accusations now proven false, blood would be shed, and Silent Wolf would be in the middle of it. The thought of him facing her father's gun made her dig her heels in harder, urging more speed from the already laboring horse. The ridge dropped away to reveal the valley below. Eleanor reined in sharply, scanning the landscape. There, a dust cloud moving steadily toward the distant foothills. The posse was still at least 2 miles from the Apache camp, their progress slowed by the difficult terrain. She had a chance. Spurring the horse down the steep hillside, Eleanor took the most direct route, cutting across open country. If she could intercept them at the narrow pass ahead, they would have to listen to her. At the Apache camp, preparations for defense were underway. Silent Wolf had returned before dawn, immediately sharing what he had learned with Black Fox and the council. The camp had been divided, some wanting to flee deeper into the mountains, others prepared to stand and fight if necessary. "They will come with guns and hatred," Black Fox warned, his weathered face grim in the morning light. "All because of cattle we did not take. We should move the women and children," Singing Bird suggested, clutching Little Hawk to her chest. "Take them to the hidden valley." Silent Wolf nodded agreement. "I will stay with the warriors. If they come seeking peaceful talk, we will talk. If they come for blood..." He left the sentence unfinished. As the camp mobilized, sorting what could be carried quickly and what must be left behind, Silent Wolf found himself drawn repeatedly to the edge of camp, looking towards Silver Creek. He thought of Eleanor, her courage in meeting him, the softness of her voice, the leather-bound book of medicines now hidden safely in his dwelling. "You are troubled, brother," Singing Bird said, approaching silently. "The woman who sends medicine," he replied slowly. "She is the school teacher." His sister's eyes widened. "You spoke with her. She warned me of the riders coming today." He hesitated. "She is not like the others." Singing Bird studied him, understanding dawning in her expression. "Be careful where your heart wanders, Silent Wolf. Some paths lead only to suffering." Before he could respond, a shout came from the western lookout. Riders approaching, at least 20 men, armed and moving with purpose. Silent Wolf strapped his knife to his belt and slung his bow across his back. He had no gun. Few in the tribe did, but he would not face these men unarmed. As the warriors assembled at the camp's edge, he felt a strange calm descend over him. Whatever happened today had been set in motion long ago, perhaps even that day at Red Rock Canyon. "They are still far," said Running Elk, the youngest of their warriors. "We could ambush them in the narrow pass." "No," Silent Wolf replied firmly. "We will meet them openly, show them we have nothing to hide." Black Fox nodded approval. "Wisdom, not war, should guide us first." The 12 warriors moved as one to the clearing that marked the entrance to their camp. Behind them, the last of the women and children were disappearing into the forest, heading for the high caves that had sheltered their people in times of danger for generations. Silent Wolf raised a hand, shading his eyes against the morning sun. The riders were closer now, dust rising from their horses' hooves. But something unexpected caught his attention. A lone rider coming from a different direction, pushing hard to intercept the main group. A rider with long hair streaming like fire in the sunlight. Eleanor. His heart lurched. What was she doing? A white woman alone, racing toward armed men on a mission of vengeance. It was madness. Dangerous, foolish madness. And perhaps the bravest thing he had ever witnessed. Eleanor spotted the posse just as they approached the narrow passage between 2 rocky outcroppings. She cut across their path, bringing her exhausted horse to a skidding halt directly in front of the lead riders. Her father and Sheriff Burke pulled up sharply, expressions of shock and anger crossing their faces. "Eleanor, what in God's name?" her father began. "The cattle are found," she shouted, her voice carrying to the men behind them. "They weren't stolen. Tommy Henderson came to town. The cattle broke through a fence and were trapped in the dry creek bed south of their pasture." A murmur rippled through the assembled men. Sheriff Burke's face showed relief, but her father's remained hard, skeptical. "Even if that's true," James Thornwood said, "it doesn't change what these savages are. They've stolen before, they'll steal again." "Listen to yourself," Eleanor pleaded. "You're looking for an excuse, not justice. These people have done nothing wrong." "These people?" Her father's voice rose dangerously. Have you forgotten your brother? What they did to Michael? That was a different tribe, hundreds of miles from here years ago. The words burst from her, years of silent disagreement finally finding voice. You can't blame every Apache for what happened to Michael any more than they can blame every white person for what's been done to them. Silence fell over the group. Eleanor became acutely aware of how she must appear, disheveled, flushed, challenging her father publicly, but she couldn't back down. Not now. Miss Thornwood is right about the cattle, Sheriff Burke said finally. If they've been found, we have no quarrel here today. Several men nodded agreement, already turning their horses. But her father remained rigid in his saddle, his gaze moving past Eleanor to something beyond. Too late, he said quietly. They're already here. Eleanor turned to see Silent Wolf and the Apache warriors standing in formation at the mouth of the pass, watching the scene unfold. Even from this distance, she could feel Silent Wolf's eyes on her, questioning, concerned. And in that moment, with both sides armed and tension crackling in the air like lightning, Eleanor Thornwood realized she was standing directly between two worlds, both literally and in every other way that mattered. Time seemed to stretch and slow as the two groups faced each other across the dusty ground. The morning breeze carried the scent of sage and pine between them, a fragile connection in a moment balanced on the edge of violence. Eleanor remained where she was, her horse heaving beneath her, directly between her father's posse and Silent Wolf's warriors. "Eleanor, get behind us. Now!" Her father's voice was steel, his hand moving to his holstered revolver. She didn't move. "No. There's been a mistake. The cattle are found. We're leaving." Sheriff Burke nodded, trying to diffuse the tension. "The girl's right, James. We came about stolen cattle, and there are no stolen cattle. Our business here is done." Several of the men muttered agreement, their initial fire for confrontation cooling in the face of truth and the steady, dignified stance of the Apache warriors. But Eleanor's father remained rigid, his eyes narrowed as he studied the Apache line. "That one," he said suddenly, pointing at Silent Wolf. "I've seen him before." Eleanor's breath caught. "Father, please." "Red Rock Canyon," James continued, revelation dawning in his voice. 8 years ago. You were there when our wagon broke down." Silent Wolf stepped forward slightly, separating himself from the line of warriors. His posture remained proud, unafraid. "I was there," he confirmed, his deep voice carrying across the space between them. "With my grandfather, we helped your family." Murmurs rippled through both groups. This unexpected connection seemed to shift the air, confusion replacing certainty on many faces. "You saved my husband's life," came a new voice. Eleanor turned to see her mother riding up, having followed the posse at a distance. Martha Thornwood's face was pale but determined as she guided her horse forward. "Your grandfather showed me how to treat James's wound. You were just a boy then." Silent Wolf inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Morning Dove," he said, using the name his grandfather had given Martha. "You remember well." "What are you doing here, Martha?" James demanded, though his voice had lost some of its edge. "Following my daughter," she replied simply, "and hoping to prevent a terrible mistake." She turned to Eleanor, her expression a mixture of concern and realization. "It was you, wasn't it? The medicines being sent to their camp?" Eleanor straightened in her saddle. There was no point in hiding now. "Yes, they suffered from fever this winter. I had knowledge that could help." "You've been helping Indians behind our backs?" Her father's voice rose again, disbelief coloring each word. "I've been helping people who needed help," Eleanor replied steadily, "just as they once helped us." Black Fox stepped forward to stand beside Silent Wolf, his weathered face solemn. "Your daughter has the healer's gift," he said in careful English. "Many of our children live because of her medicine." "Including my son," added Singing Bird, who had returned to the edge of the clearing, Little Hawk in her arms. She walked forward boldly, coming to stand near Eleanor's horse. "This child lives because of her." Eleanor looked down at the small boy, his round face so much healthier than the descriptions she had received during the winter epidemic. Their eyes met, the child's dark and curious, and he offered a shy smile that squeezed her heart. "You've been meeting with them?" It wasn't a question. Her father's face had gone from angry to something worse, betrayed. "Only once," she answered honestly. "Last night to warn them about today." The admission hung in the air. Several of the posse members shifted uncomfortably, the righteous certainty of their mission crumbling in the face of this unexpected web of connections and debts. Sheriff Burke cleared his throat. "James, the cattle are found. Whatever else is happening here is between you and your daughter. I suggest we ride back to town and let cooler heads prevail." James Thornwood looked torn, his gaze moving from his daughter to Silent Wolf and back again. Something in his expression made Eleanor's stomach twist with apprehension. "The cattle may be found," he said finally, "but that doesn't explain why this savage was in our town yesterday, or why my daughter is defending them." His eyes hardened as he looked at Silent Wolf. "What are your intentions toward my daughter?" The directness of the question seemed to surprise even Silent Wolf. For a moment, he was silent, his dark eyes meeting Eleanor's across the distance between them. What passed in that look defied the boundaries both their worlds had established: respect, understanding, and something deeper neither had dared name. "I honor your daughter's courage and wisdom," Silent Wolf said finally, "as should you." "That's not an answer," James pressed, his hand still resting on his gun. "Father, stop this," Eleanor pleaded. "No one has done anything wrong here." "Then why do I find my daughter, disheveled and alone, rushing to warn Indians against her own people? Why is she looking at this man like—" He stopped abruptly, realization dawning on his face. "No," he whispered, then more loudly, "no!" In a flash, his revolver was drawn, pointed not at Silent Wolf, but at the sky. A warning, a declaration. "James!" Martha cried, spurring her horse forward. Everything happened at once. The Apache warriors raised their bows. Several of the posse leveled their rifles. Eleanor's horse, startled by the sudden movement and noise, reared up. She fought for control, but exhausted from the hard ride, she lost her grip on the reins. Eleanor fell, hitting the ground hard enough to drive the air from her lungs. Through the dust and confusion, she saw her father and Silent Wolf both lunging toward her, from opposite directions, both with the same instinct to protect. And in that moment, as she struggled to breathe, Eleanor realized that the fragile peace of the morning had shattered beyond repair. Dust swirled as both men reached Eleanor at the same moment, her father from horseback, Silent Wolf on foot. The Apache warrior reached her first, kneeling to support her as she gasped for breath. James Thornwood dismounted in a rush, his revolver still in hand. "Get away from her," he shouted, leveling the weapon at Silent Wolf. Silent Wolf didn't move, his hand steady on Eleanor's back as she struggled to breathe. "She needs help, not more fear," he said evenly, meeting James's wild gaze. "James, stop!" Martha was there, suddenly pushing the gun aside. "Look at them!" James did look, and what he saw shook him to his core. The Apache was not touching his daughter inappropriately or threatening her. He was supporting her with the gentle competence of someone used to tending injuries. And Eleanor, rather than shrinking from his touch, was leaning into it, her hand gripping Silent Wolf's arm as she caught her breath. "I'm all right," Eleanor managed finally, her voice raspy. "The fall just knocked the wind from me." Relief washed over both men's faces, the same emotion, mirrored in two vastly different countenances. The similarity struck Martha, who stepped between them. 8 years ago, she said to her husband. "These people saved us when they could have left us to die. Now our daughter has returned that kindness. Is this how we repay debts in our family, James?" The sheriff approached cautiously. "Everyone stay calm," he urged. "Weapons down on both sides." Slowly, reluctantly, rifles and bows were lowered. The crackling tension began to dissipate, replaced by an uncertain quiet. Silent Wolf helped Eleanor to her feet, his touch falling away the moment she was steady. But their eyes held, communicating something that needed no words. James Thornwood saw it. The look between them pierced the armor of prejudice he'd built over years of grief and anger. It reminded him of how he'd once looked at Martha, with wonder, with respect, with love. "What would Michael think of this?" he asked softly, almost to himself. Eleanor turned to her father, tears in her eyes. "Michael taught me to judge people by their actions, not their origins." "He would understand, Father. He always understood better than most." The mention of her brother hung in the air, a ghost between them all. For years, his death had been a wound that would not heal, driving James's hatred of all Apache. But now, faced with the reality before him, his daughter standing tall beside a man who had helped save their family, the certainty of his hatred began to crack. "The girl speaks truth," Black Fox said, stepping forward. His weathered face held the wisdom of many winters. "I too have lost a son to violence between our peoples. Hatred only brings more death. Perhaps it is time for a different path." Sheriff Burke nodded agreement. "There's sense in that. None of us wants more bloodshed." A long moment passed as James Thornwood struggled visibly with emotions that had defined him for years. Then, with a deliberate movement that shocked everyone present, he holstered his gun. "The cattle are found," he said, his voice rough with suppressed feeling. "Our business here is done." It wasn't forgiveness or acceptance, not yet. But it was an opening, a tiny crack in a wall that had seemed impenetrable. Silent Wolf inclined his head in acknowledgment, understanding the concession for what it was. "We will continue to live in peace if your people will do the same." "Eleanor," James said, turning to his daughter, "it's time to go home." She hesitated, looking at Silent Wolf, at Little Hawk in Singing Bird's arms, at the medicine book that had somehow appeared in Silent Wolf's hand during the commotion. "I'll return to town," she agreed finally. "But I won't stop helping where I'm needed. I can't." Her father's jaw tightened, but Martha laid a gentle hand on his arm. "She's your daughter, James, stubborn as you are, and just as brave." To Eleanor, she said, "We have much to discuss at home, young lady." As the posse began to disperse, Eleanor found herself with a brief moment alone with Silent Wolf. The others pretended not to watch, giving them the illusion of privacy in the open clearing. "You risked everything," he said quietly. "So did you, coming to town to warn your people." His eyes softened. Two worlds, separated by fear and misunderstanding. Yet here we stand. "Will I see you again?" she asked, echoing her question from the night before. Silent Wolf glanced toward her father, who was mounting his horse with deliberate slowness, his back turned to them, in grudging allowance of their goodbye. "The path between our worlds is dangerous," Silent Wolf said. "But some journeys must be made despite the risk." Eleanor nodded, understanding all he couldn't say aloud. "The creek that runs between our lands," she said. "It meets at a pool near the old oak. The water there is known for its healing properties. Such a place should be visited regularly," he agreed, the ghost of a smile touching his lips, "by those who study medicine." "Until then," she whispered, turning reluctantly toward her waiting parents. Silent Wolf watched as she mounted her horse with her father's assistance. The small caravan of townspeople began their return journey, dust rising behind them like a veil separating two worlds. But veils could be lifted, borders crossed. Standing beside Black Fox, Silent Wolf felt something unfamiliar in his chest. Not the wary vigilance that had been his constant companion for years, but hope. Fragile and uncertain, yet undeniably present. 2 months later, as autumn painted the Montana hills in golds and reds, a small cabin took shape near the pool where the creek widened. Built half on reservation land, half on unclaimed territory, it belonged fully to neither world, and therefore to both. Inside, shelves lined the walls, filled with medicines both native and Western. A teacher's desk held books on healing, anatomy, and herbal remedies. And each evening, as dusk settled over Silver Creek, 2 figures could be seen approaching from opposite directions. A woman with copper hair carrying her medical bag, and a man with the quiet grace of a wolf, bringing knowledge as ancient as the mountains themselves. They met at the threshold, neither fully stepping into the other's world, but creating instead a new one where both could exist, where hatred might, with time and understanding, give way to healing. And in that small cabin, Eleanor Thornwood and Silent Wolf built something revolutionary. Not just a medical practice that served 2 communities, but a bridge across a divide that had once seemed impossible to cross. Love, they discovered, was not about erasing differences or surrendering identity. It was about finding the courage to see beyond boundaries to the humanity that connected them all. A lesson that would, in time, spread beyond their small corner of Montana, as ripples spread from a single stone cast into still waters. In the years to come, many would whisper about the strange partnership at the edge of town, the schoolteacher who married her medicine with ancient wisdom, and the Apache healer who walked between 2 worlds with quiet dignity. Some disapproved, others marveled, but none could deny the lives saved, the suffering eased, the understanding fostered. And on warm summer evenings, visitors to the cabin might glimpse them sitting side by side on the porch, their shoulders touching, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that belonged to no single people, but to the land itself. Red and gold, dusk and dawn, an endless cycle of endings and beginnings, as timeless as the love that had defied every boundary to bloom in the shadow of the Montana mountains.